Okay, here we are. Got my beautiful grandmother, my beautiful niece Kiana. Kiana's decided to do a nice project before school starts this year. Gonna ask some questions, learn about this lovely lady.
Whoa.
Yeah. All right, so I'll start it out. Let's give the people your full name.
Elinor H.
H.
Remus
Deeb.
Deeb.
It's got a nice ring to it. When were you born? What was your birthday?
9/18/1930.
I'm not doing a arrest report here. Let's just September. There we go.
18th,
Yep.
1930.
1930. Okay. And where were you born?
In Tonawanda, New York, at 303 Grove Street.
In the house?
In a house.
Dang, no hospital.
No hospital.
You guys are wild. Okay.
No, it was a long time ago.
Did a lot of people get born like that?
Yeah.
Really?
Really. My brother was born at 295 Grove Street. That's Helmut. And my youngest brother was born in this house.
This house that we're in right now?
1937, yes.
Okay.
Can you tell me about your parents?
My parents are, were, Arthur Conrad Remus. He was born on January 17th, 1896.
It's a long time ago.
In Germany, grew up in Stettin is how you would say it in English. It was a seaport, and I'm not sure if he was born there, but that's where he grew up. He and his brothers came to America in about 1925. They say circa, meaning about. That's what historians do. That's the word they use. And he and his brothers came because there were hard times in Germany, and they were looking to start anew, to start over. My father's first wife, and I don't know her name, passed away when my sister was 13 days old. So he left his two children with his mother and sisters, and the three brothers went to America over the Atlantic Ocean in 1925 on a steamship. So they settled. They went to it's North Tonawanda, either area, Bergholz or Martinsville. No, I think my grandma and grandpa went to Martinsville, but my father and his brothers went to Bergholz area. They were people in America at the time, in various churches, were sponsoring families or individuals from Germany or other areas that wanted to come to the United States to become citizens and to establish homesteads, whatever. And in order for the people to come, they had to have a home to come to, and that's where the churches came in. They provided families that would take in a family or an individual and make sure that they started to learn English. They had to try to find them jobs, help them find jobs, and a place to live independently. And so those things were very important, because they didn't want people just coming in swoosh. They wanted to make it easy for them. The three brothers then were in that area. And so now for a second we'll turn to my mother and her parents, my grandparents. They came also in about that time, but they came from a different area of Germany. They lived in Berlin at the time. My great-grandparents lived in a little village on the river, and I believe it's called the Oder River, that was the one that Stettin was on the end of. It was the seaport at the end of that river. And so my mother and her brother and sister often went on summer vacation times to visit their grandparents, who lived on a river that kind of connected my father's family.
Oh, man.
And so, but anyway, they came from Berlin. That was my grandma and grandpa Nickel. They came, they brought their children, and wanted to start over again in America also. Because at the time my mother was 17 years old when they came, but she had already started to work, because boys and girls in that time period went to school in that country, went to school until they were 14 about, and then they went right to either an apprenticeship, or if they were rich, they went on to another school. But most people went to an apprenticeship of some kind. And so I have to think a minute. The work that my grandma did, she was a bookkeeper, and she worked for like a company that sold shoes.
Uh-huh.
And she said the things were so expensive, the money had devalued. There was inflation, and the money devalued. So she said they would, the bookkeeper and the other people that worked in the money end of the business, they had to count the money as it came in. And she said in order, at the end of each day, they had to put the money in a bank. And she said it got to the point where they had to use a wheelbarrow to put the money in. It was like so many, if it was $1, it took $10 or $12.
Really?
And so if a pair of shoes, cost $10, then it was a whole stack of money by the time they gathered it all in at the end of the day. But she said they took it in a wheelbarrow. That's her words. I don't know exactly.
Yes.
But anyway, so people were really, they had just gotten over the war. The war ended in 1918, and the war was done, so everything fell apart because they had lost the war. and they got an opportunity just like my father did and his family did to go to America, and they were sponsored by a church also, and the family that they went to were the Teals, and the Teals had a dairy store and everything in Martinsville.
What area is Martinsville?
Well, it's
So it's not called Martinsville anymore.
no,
right?
no. It's North Tonawanda. It's in fact at the beginning of Old Shawnee Road.
Okay.
That's the little one that comes in at the side to the new Shawnee.
Yeah, so that's the Teals Market that's
Yeah,
right up the road from where we live.
yeah.
Okay.
And they came there, and they also had to do the same thing. They had to learn English. My mother and my aunt and uncle probably had learned a few words of English in school, but not enough to do anything with, So they had a little start.
What year did your mom come?
About the same time,
Okay, so
1925, 26, in that area.
Gotcha.
Now, let's see, it was my father's three brothers came, and then my grandparents, Martha and Richard Nickel, were my mother's parents. My mother, Erna, my uncle Richard, and my aunt Hildegard. Helga, she called herself. And they came, bag and baggage. They couldn't carry much, just what they could put in a couple of suitcases or carry was all they could bring. And they also came that way. They came over, across the Atlantic.
Mm-hmm.
They were brave on a ship. And in 1925 or 26, they weren't fancy. It was really the beginning of everything. And they came over here, and they settled in Martinsville, or North Tonawanda. I think along Martinsville is it's all that Old Falls Boulevard area, and across the Niagara Falls Boulevard,
Okay.
Shawnee, and all that.
All that area?
Yeah. And then further out Shawnee, or the other roads, further to the north was Burkholtz and whatever other communities, I don't know for sure. So they all got here, and they looked for jobs, and my grandmother was a seamstress. She specialized in children's clothing, making suits and things for boys especially. That was her specialty. And she also repaired or altered clothes for children. And my grandfather was a carpenter. He was a cabinet maker, they called it. He really was specialized in that. So they got, my grandmother worked from the home, and my grandfather started out working in lumber companies, but as a builder of boxes or anything he could, do, because he didn't have the language skills and that, they eventually acquired. But they all had, at that time, everybody who wanted to be a citizen had to learn the language, which was English, American English. And my father, not my grandfather, my father, he said when he came here, he said the people thought they were talking German to them, but he said it was Brubbel Lateinisch, which means jumbled up Latin. It wasn't a real language. They'd say something, 2 words in German, and then there'd be an English word in between, and that's what I speak. If it's a German and I don't know the word, I stick in an American word,
there you go,
an English word. Let's see. And they met. My mother and father met in Buffalo. They took, they called it the high-speed line, or they took a train to Buffalo, and there was a youth, kind of a club like the YMCA or YWCA, that kind of thing. And it was called the Turnverein, which means an athletic, turn means like exercises, I'm not really sure, but kind of like athletic club. Verein means an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where they went, and they had a youth group that would meet. Some of the people played sports. My father, who had grown up in Germany, they were hot on soccer at that time. They called it football, and he played football. They each, they had teams within this youth group and other youth groups that were nearby. So they met there, and they fell in love and got married. And this was by June 26th, 1929. They were married, and 6 weeks after they were married, my mother always said she became an instant mother because my father sent for his mother, his 2 sisters, and his 2 children. Because remember I said when my sister was born, when she was 13 days old, her mom died. Mm-hmm. So then she was, by that time, I think she was between 2 and 3 years old, and my brother was about 6. So I'm not sure. My sister was born in 1925. 25, and so her mother died just that shortly after. So then they were all here, and my Uncle Hugo and my grandmother, my grandfather Albert Remus had passed away. He was a tailor also. He passed away. He was handicapped. He had something, we probably would have said it was like polio or something when he was a child, 9 or 10, and his his one leg never grew past that age, so he had one short leg and one regular leg. But he was a tailor, and they lived in an apartment in Germany that was on like the second floor or third floor. I'm not sure, but they lived in these apartments. Had like a courtyard in the middle where there was grass and plantings and stuff, and the kids could play there. It was like your backyard, but all the people, the children could play there, or the parents could walk around or whatever. And so my grandfather sat on his table, which is what they did in those years. They'd have a big table, and so they could spread out the material and everything. And he would sit on the table, and he could look out the window at the kids playing in the courtyard. And my father said he and his brothers and the gang, they'd get a little rowdy every once in a while.
Yeah, that's what it's all about.
And when they got too wild, my grandfather would take his cane and pound on the window, and they'd hear it, and they'd know, their dad was looking. So he said if they didn't cool it, then he'd tap again. And if that didn't help, he would go downstairs very rapidly. Now, he had the one short leg and the one regular leg. But my father said he would go 3 steps at a time.
Jeez.
Cane and leg. And he'd run down those stairs, and he said, boy, if he caught you, you'd get it. So he said they didn't often wait for the second one. They would cool it beforehand. But he passed away then, I don't know exactly when, but sometime, before my father, who was in World War I also. My father was in World War I. He was, my grandfather was born in 1885. My grandpa Nickel was born in 1885. And my father was born in, he was 11 years younger. He was born in 1896. So he was 11 years younger than my grandfather. My grandfather and my mother's father. And both of them served in the war. My father served in France and whatever the area was where the war was taking place, and my father was in that area. My grandfather got as far as, I think it was Turkey. They had something with the Arab countries. My Grandpa Nickel was in the cavalry. He was a cabinet maker. Mm-hmm. He went to the cavalry. They did that thing. And of course, my father was only like 18, opposed to my grandfather's 29. So it was like they were both in service. My father had a bullet went through his wrist, and he had a big scar there. My grandfather Nickel was not hurt in the war. but he learned how to take care of horses, and he learned a lot about the Middle East too. And I married somebody whose parents came from Syria, which was
look at
in
that.
the Middle East. So it's a small world.
So, how many siblings do you have? Your father had two?
Yes,
Two
I
kids
have.
before,
I have. Yeah, Gert and Gisela,
Gert and Gisela.
Elinor, Helmut, and Heinz. So I had 3 brothers and 1 sister.
And where do you fall in
I'm
that?
in the middle.
You're the middle.
I'm the eldest of their marriage,
Okay.
and the middle child of my mom and dad.
Okay. So, let's see. What's the earliest memory you have from your childhood?
From my childhood,
Yep.
I have little things that I do remember. I remember when we lived on Grove Street, and I couldn't have been very big because I got there were 3 bedrooms upstairs at 295 Grove Street is where we ended up, because of the 303 Grove Street where I was born. My parents were buying that house when they got married in 1929. And the stock market crashed, and it was the beginning of the Depression. And they lost that. But my father was still working, so he moved all of us into 295. They wanted to save one of the houses because, my grandparents were buying that. So they had my grandma and grandpa, my mother and father, my Uncle Richard, my Aunt Hilda, and they had me and the 2 kids. So we had how many people? 9 people in a house that was as big as that before the living room was built.
Oh man. So what was it? What was it like growing up? I guess during that time period, as far as like
I remember being in that house. The first memory. Now I'm not sure that it's really a memory or if I've just been told that. But the sleeping arrangements were my grandma and grandpa and I slept in the 1 bedroom that I can see the window from my house when there aren't any leaves on the trees. And my mother and dad and my sister and brother slept in the other bedroom. Let me see, who was in... Oh no, I think it was... Because my aunt and uncle slept downstairs. My mother and father, and it could have been one of the kids, and my Aunt Hilda and the other child slept in the little bedroom, which was about half as big as this room. It was a tiny bedroom. And my uncle slept downstairs on the chaise longue, which is a couch that has like a
curve to it, right?
Yeah, curve to it, and it doesn't have any arms or slide or anything. It's just like a ski slope. And that had to be straightened up like my bed during the day, because otherwise it looks like there's hobos sleeping there or something. Anyway, so we stayed there. My father, after a while, my father was the only one that was still working and earning money. but we had, the situation was such, you know, you can't live like that very long. So I remember sleeping in that room, and it's the weirdest thing. I couldn't have been but a year or two, you know, 2 years old.
Yeah.
But that's the absolute first. I do remember one apartment we had. I think it was the one on Zimmerman Street in North Tonawanda, because we did live there for a while. And we lived, it was a regular house. And I know from a story that was told when I was growing up, that when my sister, who was like 3 years old maybe, she looked out the window of the kitchen or whatever, and she saw the outhouse in the back, and she said, "Mommy, a little garage." So whenever we saw an outhouse on our travels later in life,
Yeah.
we'd say, "Hey, Gisela, there's a little garage." So those little garages you don't see much.
You don't see them often.
No, probably not at all anymore. And I remember hearing that story, but I remember playing. It was like, you know, when you go upstairs in some houses, there's a landing, and then the stairway maybe goes the other way a little bit. Well, I remember playing on this landing. There was a window, and I had a little table and chairs, like a little kid's table, and chairs there, and my brother and I used to play there. So he must have been 2.
2?
Yeah,
So, okay.
because he's a year younger than I.
What did you and your friends do for fun?
Well, mostly we, in the summer, we played outside. We were outside more than in. We were either helping in the garden or running around and playing. We played games. When we got older, we played on Grove Street. All the front yards were kind of open. People didn't have a lot of fences or dividers between. And so we played across 3 or 4 lawns out there, and there were like 20 kids, you know. It was a lot of kids. People had a lot of children. And so it was like, in the summer, it was as soon as you could get away. If you had something you had to do for your parents, you did that first, and then you could go and play, and that's what we did. We played go in and out the windows. What was the game you sang, and the people would hold hands in a circle, and they'd go in and out, and they played duck, duck, goose, you know, silly things like that. Spin the bottle and stuff. Like, oh, that was the older kids did that. I never did that. But that was the type of thing. When we, in the wintertime, of course, you got to make snowmen and shovel. Mostly you had to shovel first, and then you can do whatever you want, build forts or whatever. And we played out and back in the summer too. We had the big lot that's in between where it's the triangular part that of my yard in the back where the garden is. That was all like, it'd be a ditch, and then there'd be like a hump where you could walk along, but you had to jump over the ditches because it was water in it all the time. And there were maybe 4 or 5 ditches like that, and then little places. And one time my father said that they wanted that somebody wanted to sell that, and it was like going to be really cheap to buy it. So I remember that there were arguments. My mother was not happy about it, but my father was all excited because he could get his farm. Well, he already had rabbits in the, tame rabbits for food, and eventually we got chickens and we had a few ducks. But the property behind there was so bad that you couldn't do anything. We could find guppies and well, they were tadpoles. They weren't guppies, they were tadpoles, but they looked like guppies. And snakes and frogs and bugs and stuff, and plants, lots of different kinds of plants, weeds, type things grew there. It was a lot of fun playing in there. But then my father and his friends would get loads of dirt. Had to be, good stuff to put in there. And eventually my father and my grandfather, my uncle, they built the garden. So
This one Kiana's been learning about a little bit this week, and she wants to ask you that one.
How did you talk to your friends without cell phones?
without cell phones, we either went over to their house or they came to our house, or we just talked like right now.
Yeah, can you believe that?
We'd sit around and talk. That's a good thing.
Yeah. Kiana doesn't believe that you can not be glued to it and, communicate with people.
We didn't even have a phone when I lived here, when we first lived here. We didn't have a phone. I used to have to go over because my Aunt Hilda had gone to beauty school and learned to be a cosmetician, a hairdresser. Mm-hmm. And they had a phone because she had a business. Mm-hmm. And so this was, it had to be at least in the 40s. And I don't know if it was before the war or might have been before the war. So the war started for us in 1941 on December 7th when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. But you don't know what was going on beforehand when you're a kid. And I don't know. I haven't studied much. I don't care for war. So anyway, you didn't. I didn't miss it because I never had it. I also never had. We had a radio, but in the very beginning, I remember my brother and my dad building crystal sets. Crystal sets, they were like certain kinds of rocks have the crystal formations, and you can with an electric probe like thing you could find stations.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
Yeah. Look up crystal set radios, under radios. And then eventually we did, my grandparents had a radio. And then we did get one a little while, by the time I was 6 maybe. Huh. And, but we just talked together. You went over to see somebody at their house. It's not like where you live. It would be difficult.
True.
I don't know how you would do it because you can't walk around the block at your house. Where I could walk around the block. I could talk to anybody all the way around, and you didn't have to worry. People weren't, I don't know, they've gotten really
Some crazy people.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So
Crazier.
you mentioned the World War II starting when you were growing up. Do you remember like things? Did things change a lot for you as a kid, or?
Yeah. Well, let's see. In the day of the bombing, we had taken a bus trip. We didn't have a car, by the way. And so we took a bus trip up to Buffalo to see a movie. And movies were very new in the 30s and the 40s. They started, I think, in the 20s, but we would go to a movie occasionally. And if you wanted to go to a fancier movie theater, you had to go up to Buffalo. So we'd take the bus and go up there. And when we got out of the theater, out of the theater, we heard newspaper boys. You've seen it maybe in an old movie or something. Extra, extra.
Yeah.
And they had that newspaper that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor. I don't know whether it was, I don't know what date it was. This December 7th that the attack happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it was like the 8th or, shortly after. And that's when we found out about it. A lot of things changed because, first of all, there was a draft that all the young men had to register for the draft.
Yep.
And then they would select by number. They picked a series of numbers, and whoever's number it was had to go to see if they were eligible, because a lot of people, couldn't serve. But they had no choice. They had to do it. So that they've eliminated now. And it's voluntary. The Army now is voluntary. But at that time it wasn't. So everybody was worried that, their sons or brothers or whatever would go into the service. And it was a certain age group.
Mm-hmm.
My brother went in 1942. Now this was December of 41. So it was immediately after he was called up for the service. And we had rationing, what do they call it? I do have somewhere in this house. I have some books, ration books. They were little booklets there were tickets like you'd tear off for a raffle or something, and you got a certain number of shoes. When you were a kid, you got maybe shoes twice a year. One pair of shoes you were allowed. And your feet were growing, but older folks didn't get that many, and what was it? Because they had to conserve everything. We had, if you had canned goods, you had to, after you ate the food, you had to wash out the cans, take both ends off, take the paper off, put the two ends that you had cut off in between, and step on the cans so that there would only be a thin thing, and you had to keep that in a bag or a container until it was garbage day, and then you had to bring that. And they conserved paper. We had rationing of sugar, and I'm trying to think some of the other things. Meat was rationed because they had to have things for the military.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I can't think there were other things. Oh, if people had cars, they could only gasoline was rationed, and tires, all kinds of things. That of course we didn't have it because we didn't have it because we didn't have a car.
Yeah.
We couldn't afford a car.
So what about when the war ended, and like how long did it take for things to go back to somewhat normal, or how did that feel? Was that like a relief, or I mean?
Well, it was in that we didn't have to, do the
Rations.
the rations and everything, but it seemed like a long time. Well, it was till 1945, 6.
Yeah.
Because 45 was it 44 and 45? I don't know. But anyway, it was the European end of the war came first, and then the Japanese was, a number of months later. My brother was in the service, so we worried a lot. He was over in the China, Burma, India theater, they called it.
Yeah.
He was an Army engineer, and they worked on the China, Burma, India road. And we would, he would write to us, and we'd get maybe a letter, and then might be 2 or 3 weeks before we'd get another letter, so you'd worry all that while.
Oh, sure.
We had, in our window in the front, we had a little, like a little flag. It was a rectangle, and it had like gold trim around the outside, and in the center it was red, white, and blue, and in the center there was a blue star, meaning that was you had a service person in your family.
Okay.
And if your son was killed, then you could put a gold star there. And a lot of times they would do ceremonies to honor the families who lost their children, and there were a lot of deaths.
Yes.
So
after the war, you're how old in 1945?
in 1945, I was 15.
15. And when did you meet Grandpa? When did you guys?
When I met him, I was 18.
18. You guys got married. How soon after that?
2 years.
2 years. That's not bad.
No.
You're doing all right. All right. So how? And at that point, at 18, what were you doing? Did you have a job? Were you going to school?
Yes. I went to school. I graduated in June of 1948. I was 17 years old. And I had been working the time I was like 7th grade after school. I did mostly secretarial kind of stuff. And my sister, who was 5 years older, had like, she was working in a bank already, and she was a bookkeeper also.
Okay.
What did you want to do when you grew up?
I wanted to be a teacher, but I couldn't afford to go to college. Not that I couldn't, because it was free to go to college. For a New York State residence, you could go to a New York State school. But I didn't have, I wouldn't have had enough money because I couldn't afford books and all that kind of stuff. And we couldn't afford to the transportation and all that stuff. So I decided I was going to work for a few years, and I was going to save enough to go to college. I didn't do it
Why not?
because I met your grandpa,
That
Jiddo.
son of a gun.
Yeah, and what I did do, though, the money that I had saved was used to buy a refrigerator, a stove, a kitchen table, and chairs. So I had enough to do that. They weren't as expensive, though, let me tell you. And if you see that piggy on the middle shelf there, the biggest one,
Yeah.
with the ear up and the smile,
Mm-hmm.
that was my graduation present
That
from my
pig?
parents. It still got money in it because I had saved every paycheck. I put all the change, which wasn't a lot, but I put it in there. But didn't have the heart to kill the piggy in order to get the money out, because it wasn't that important to me. So it's still got a lot of old money in it.
Oh man.
And it's probably got some new money because occasionally little kids used to put money in it.
I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah.
So you got married. You were what? 20 years old?
I was 19. I got married June 17th,
June 17th.
1950.
Did you guys have like a big wedding, or was it kind of under the radar? Or?
No, it was an average wedding.
Yeah.
We had our reception at the new Eagles building down here on Delaware Street.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Eagle is still there. Was it an eagle
I
on
know
the?
it is.
Yeah, we had our reception there, and it was like two rooms adjoining, and so it wasn't big,
Yeah.
but it was fun. I can show you pictures.
Did you have a dance floor?
Yeah, there was a dance floor. We didn't dance.
Why not?
Well, your grandpa was not a dancer.
I thought he was a.
Oh,
No?
he was a charmer. He wasn't a dancer.
He was a charmer, she says. So,
Yeah.
okay, so you get married. Then what? Do you have a place that you guys are living, or?
No, we had one room at the store, Deeb's Delicatessen, and we had one room.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't allowed to use the kitchen upstairs. There wasn't much in it, but you couldn't use the kitchen because you might wreck something because you were just a kid. And I was barely 20 years old, and I didn't, I had to come downstairs and cook if I wanted to cook anything. I had to use the facilities downstairs. And your Jiddo, though, was very good at the business, and he was very clever with his hands. The stainless steel back at the kitchen, the big stainless steel along the walls, and all the like the grill and griddle, or whatever they call that.
Mm-hmm.
And he had built-in fryers, just like a regular
Yeah, like a restaurant or something.
restaurant. Yeah. And we had a big. He bought a used oven, the big oven, and at one point we had a big. It was called a broaster. It was a deep fat fryer it looked like a wash machine because it was that circular thing,
Mm-hmm.
and then it had the deep fat, and you had to, after you got it to temperature and put your food in it, then you put this cover down and sealed it. It was like a pressure cooker.
Okay.
It was called a broaster. Broaster, broaster.
Okay.
And it cooked them within minutes. And they were like when you eat the chicken that Budweiser makes. It was like that. It was.
Huh.
It was
So
very
it was
good.
kind of like a deep fryer kind
Yeah,
of thing?
it was a deep fryer, but it was under pressure.
So
that-
what was the business there? It was like a restaurant store kind of thing?
Yeah.
Like
It had started out as just a store,
yeah.
but Jiddo, he put the dividing wall up, and because it was only a partial wall. I think it still is.
Yeah.
Only a partial wall, and he did when we were married, he did the other stuff to improve it.
Now, so what kind of food did they serve there? Was it a little bit of everything, or was it all Syrian food?
No, it wasn't all Syrian food at any time, but when Aunt Lemia, who is about 5 years, was about 5 years younger than I,
Mm-hmm.
when she came, she was 16, I think, 15 or 16. 15. And she after a while, when she finally, she didn't know any English. She had never gone to school. She was like my mother-in-law, Taita. She never went to school either.
Mm-hmm.
Women did not go to school in Syria, and women weren't educated. So when Taita came over, she didn't know how to read or write, but she learned English. She could make change so good, and she could tell you a lot of good stories. She was a wonderful lady. She really was brave, just like I think all of your ancestors were brave. They came across an ocean, and Jiddo and Taita came. This is your Jiddo's father, and Taita, his mother, came across the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean, where my parents just came from across the Atlantic.
Do you know how long that took?
I don't know.
No, I'm
A
just
couple
curious.
of weeks, I'm
Really?
sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
I know it was a long time.
Yeah, like she was saying, it's not like it was a cruise ship. It was like a.
Yeah.
It's like a.
It was, oh God, I'd have to get the things out and show you, but they're buried back there. I know where they are. They're in that, those two china cabinets.
Yeah.
They're in the one that's over there.
I'll have to dig those out sometime.
Yeah.
Check them out. That's cool.
Yeah, and I know where my father, the ship that his brothers and he sailed on.
Oh. So, you're living there. I guess when did you guys?
Settle here.
Yeah.
Well, I was 3 years old, I'm told. I don't remember. I remember coming here. Oh, I remember one thing. When I was about 5, maybe, or 6, I had to have my tonsils out. And my parents took me to the Graff Hospital. I had to stay overnight. My mother stayed with me. We came back the next day. My father was carrying me into the house. And I don't know if you noticed, but when you come in my front door, there's a little bit of a ledge.
Yeah.
My father stubbed his toe on that ledge. He's carrying me, and a kid, you know, is pretty big at 5 or 6. And he got running. He didn't want to drop me or fall on me. And luckily, where my buffet is now,
Yeah.
there's where the couch was.
So he dropped you right there?
And he threw me onto the couch. I remember that.
There we go. Another memory.
It's a memory.
So when did you and Grandpa, when did you guys have, who was first, Aunt Susan?
No, Pat.
No, Pat.
Aunt Pat.
Pat.
Yeah, Aunt Pat. Let's see. Aunt Pat we got married on June 17th, 1950, and she was born. She was supposed to be born in April 15th, but I was sick every day of the whole thing. And I had, on the 29th of March,
Mm-hmm.
I had her,
And what year?
1951. So she was 9 months and like 14 days from the time I got married. So you can tell. We didn't waste any time.
No, you were getting after it. All right.
Yeah. And then Aunt Susan was born a year and 3-4 months, 16 months
Mm-hmm.
afterward. And then Uncle Pete was born in 1954. So it was 51, 52, 54. But he was born in January. So from the time Aunt Pat was born until Uncle Pete was born was 34 months. Less than 3 years. I had 3 babies.
Man.
And I was kind of tired out. But then we waited a long time. And your mom
Yeah.
and your Mima came along about 3 years, 9 months, 3 years, 9 months later.
Mm-hmm.
And then 7 years and about 4 months, there was Chris. So there's like 3 years, another 3 years, there's another one, and then 7 years later. So there's 14 years from Aunt Pat to Aunt Chris.
Wow. So what was it like raising all these kids? 14 years difference. Was it hard? Or were they pretty good?
It was hard. It was hard, no lie. But I really loved it because I had the kids around and I could do what I wanted to, and it was good. My mother, one time we were having a party, and it was in the new house, which was 55 James Street.
Okay.
And I had living room, dining room, and then there was our bedroom.
Yep.
So I had, probably it was like Peter's, I think when Peter was real little, we had this birthday party, I don't know whose, and I always put the kids on, we had twin beds that were pushed together, and I always put the youngest one on the bed there. I'd make a little mat, and then I'd put the kid on and put a cover on, and they could sleep while we had the party in the dining room, right? And I don't know, he woke up and he needed to be changed, and my mother went, she said, "Oh, I'll change him, I'll take care of him." She comes back, she said, "I see you didn't finish your wash." I had a pile in a basket of washed clothes, but they were in there. And they were things I had to iron, because back in the old days you had to iron everything. Nothing was like polyester or anything that would smooth out by itself. And I was so upset. I started to cry. She said, "Hey, wait a minute. You've got 3 babies. Your job is to take care of those babies." She says, "If anybody says anything to you about work that isn't done, you tell them, here's the iron, here's the whatever. Do it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm too busy with my babies. Take care of your babies. Enjoy them." And that's what you need to do. And so that was my theory in life after that. The heck with the work. Take care of the kids.
There you go.
So we had some good times growing up, those kids.
Yeah, what were some of the best times that you can recall or that you think of?
Go take a walk down to the river.
Yeah, just a little
Walk
things.
around, yeah. Well, I didn't have a car. I couldn't drive until after Peter. I learned how to drive after Peter was born. Because when Aunt Pat, before she was born, my husband, your Jiddo, said, "I'm going to teach you how to drive." Never having a car and never having driven or with anybody really very much,
Mm-hmm.
I was afraid. And I'm expecting a baby. I was really nervous. Well, he takes me out for teaching me how to drive. And after a few weeks, he figured, she's got it. But anyway, we went Sunday afternoon, and backing up was you always had to learn how to back up. So we back out, we drive around the corner to where there's a factory there now. It was a big parking lot for Spalding's. We drive in there. He said, "Go in here." I said, "Pete, are we going to turn around now?" He said, "Oh no, we're going to go over to Franklin Street." There was a little, like a dirt road that went to Franklin Street. The houses on James Street are all along here.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the little embankment for the railroad, and the railroad cuts kind of kitty corner. And this little road runs right along the backyards and the side yard of one. In the backyards, there were one of the yards, I don't remember which one, was like 4, 5, 6 apple trees and like a little orchard. So we're going down this dirt road thing, and he said, "Okay, we're going to make a 3-point turn and turn around." I said, no. He said, "You can do it," because I had done it on the street.
Yeah.
So I go around, do the first part, back up, and like the wheel was like the back wheel was going down. And I'm saying, "Oh, Pete, take over." "Oh, no," he said, "I got to go eat an apple." So he gets out of the car, goes around to sat under the tree and ate an apple. And I'm sitting here, this car is off, and it's standard shift.
Uh-huh.
You know the feeling?
Yeah.
Well, I did not know what to do. I was getting madder and sadder, and I didn't know what. But I was really getting mad. But son of a gun, I'm expecting his child, and he's sitting there, and he was laughing at me. He wanted me to get mad enough to get out of there, I think. So I got really mad, and zoom, I went out.
Did you leave him?
I left him under the tree, and I put the car back, and I put it in the driveway, and I got out, and I went. We were living in the store at that time in that one room. I went up to the room, and I just lay down on the bed. I was so mad. Oh man! But I got out of there.
See?
And that was his object, I'm sure. But he picked the wrong time to do it. Never do that to a lady that's expecting a baby.
That's
So.
awesome. That's good. All right, I got a couple of questions for you. I think we'll probably wrap it up in a few
Okay.
minutes here, unless you
All
got
right.
some other pointers you want to get to.
No,
All right.
I can't think of anything.
All right,
I mean,
well-
you'd keep me talking for a few years.
Yeah. Okay. Did you ever get to travel or do any, like, see anything?
Let's see. I did a little bit of traveling, not much. We went to Canada quite often.
What'd you do in Canada? Just to Niagara Falls, or did you go?
We went to Crystal Beach,
Okay.
which was an amusement park. We didn't go often. We went maybe twice in my memory. But when you went through, you had to go through customs. You'd go through. You'd get on the ferry, and you would go onto the boat, go across, and then when you wanted to come into Canada, you'd go through customs, and it was like you had to. They would ask you your name and whatever, and where were you born. So all of us, we said where we were born, because you had to be sure that you were either a citizen or whatever they wanted to know. So my sister was like a teenager, and she misunderstood. She thought he said, "Where are you going?" And she said, "Crystal Beach" or something.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of detained her for a while.
Really?
Yeah, well, we all had to wait
Yeah.
for her until she figured out. Well, she got real upset, and then my mother and father had to say, well, where she was born, and they had to have their birth certificates.
Jeez.
You had to have your birth certificate to show. If you weren't born in the United States. I was born in the United States, so I never had
You didn't have that
any
problem.
problem.
Is there anywhere that you would want to go, or anywhere you wanted to go when you were growing up?
I mean, I wanted to go to Europe because I wanted to see where my parents came from,
Mm-hmm.
but I never did. But I did see quite a few states.
Yeah.
I went 2 or 3 or 4 times to Florida. I went all the way across the country when we went to rescue your Mima. Well, there was I don't know if you guys know any of the problem, but it was right after.
Was she with Sue?
No. She
I
went.
know that one.
She went down to be with your Jiddo, your Bipa. I'm sorry, got the wrong name.
Oh, Louisiana.
Louisiana, yeah. But we went. It took us all day and all night, driving. We didn't have the. You couldn't go on a throughway. There weren't that. There wasn't that much in the travel. Took a little longer. And I went to New York City. I went to Connecticut to visit my friend's sister. Where else did I go? Oh, one time I went to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to a ranger convention. The only one I went to with you, just with your Jiddo. And let's see where else. I guess that's it.
So Europe was on the bucket list, though.
Yeah, it was, but I think forget it now. I travel on the television. I watch. I do. I enjoy those. There's some countries I'd like to see. There's some countries I'm glad that I'm here
Yeah, oh, yeah.
and looking at it, especially now.
Well, what are some of the other ones that you would like to see?
Well, I would have liked to go to the Holy Land, but I don't want to be anywhere near that
You want to
now.
take that?
Yeah.
One more for you. What advice would you give to live a fulfilled life?
Enjoy what you're doing right now. Live in the moment, enjoy it. Do as much as you can to help the environment, and be kind to all the folks around you. Love your friends and your neighbors and your family.
I like it. It's beautiful. All right, so that concludes our interviews. Part 1. Maybe there'll be more.
Oh, well,
Yeah, you never know. We could get wild with this thing.
Hey.
You know, could get famous off this.
oh, sure. Well, anyway, maybe you'll remember some of these things and be able to look at them.
Today,
No, I don't like you.
so today,
No. Why do we have to do that?
we're on.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Oh gosh, I can't do that.